Good evening, everyone. My name is Marlianne Lopez, and I'm the Program and Outreach Coordinator at the Simone de Beauvoir Institute at Concordia University. Even though we're holding this event on a virtual platform, territorial acknowledgements are still pertinent and necessary today, especially considering that Indigenous communities are still subjected to colonial state violence. Since this is a Concordia event, I would like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Ganya Gigahaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather here today. Jajage, Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is a home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We support community efforts to sustain a relationship with Indigenous peoples based on respect, dignity, trust, cooperation, and the process of advancing truth and justice. In recognizing that this space occupies colonized First Nation territories and out of respect for the rights of Indigenous people, it is our collective responsibility to critically interrogate the colonial histories and present-day implications of this, and to honor, protect, and sustain this land. Before presenting Kalimah Johnson, I would like to thank our sponsors, the Canadian Women's Foundation, the Sexual Assault Resource Center at Concordia, and Jury Pop, and also invite them to say a few words. I'll invite President and CEO Paulette Sr. to say a few words now.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marlianne, and all of our incredible guests this evening, in particular, Kalimah, for joining us. I can't wait to hear you. And I do also just want to thank all of you who are joining us virtually this evening. Because I have the privilege of being here on behalf of the Canadian Women's Foundation, I am pretty proud to be joining you. The issues we're focusing on this evening are central to the Foundation's vision. And that vision is a Canada where gender equity is realized for all women and girls. We continue to be guided by the wise words of one of our founding mothers, the late, great Rosemary Brown, the first woman to run for the leadership of a federal party, and in fact, the first Black woman to be elected to a provincial legislature in Canada. Rosemary, as one of her founders once said, "Until all of us have made it, none of us have made it." For those of you who don't know the Canadian Women's Foundation, we fund programs across Canada. We raise money to fund these programs, and we prioritize communities where the needs are greatest. These programs address 4 urgent issues: gender-based violence, economic security and prosperity, girls' empowerment, and inclusive leadership. We also work to improve systems and policies and practices to advance intersectional gender equity. So as you know, the pandemic has intensified social inequities of all kinds. So our work is now more urgent than ever. And we are helping to raise awareness so that social restrictions, that we know increase the risk of violence for women, girls, and gender non-binary folks in abusive situations. We've also been promoting the signal for help, which is basically a hand signal that looks like this, that people can use silently on a video call such as this to indicate that they would like someone to check in on them safely. It is something that we created at the top of the pandemic because we realized that so many women were living in isolation, some of them with their abusers. So hopefully you'll look that up at CanadianWomen.org to learn some more. At the Canadian Women's Foundation, redefine service providers who face new challenges serving women, girls, and non-binary folk, worked with the federal government to distribute much needed dollars of emergency funding to sexual assault centers across the country. Yet we know it's not enough, and so we continue to fundraise and advocate for more dollars. I want to commend Kalimah for your extraordinary trailblazing work that you've done to spotlight the specific barriers Black women face when it comes to reporting and recovering from sexual assault. You are amplifying the voices we need to hear and breaking much needed ground on the vast amount of work that still needs to be done to end sexual assault against. Do summon the courage to come forward. Their cases may be mishandled by police. In fact, we know this for sure, or by the courts, and only a small fraction of sexual assault cases end in convictions. And even after the Me Too movement, a recent Stats Canada survey found that only 47% of men agree that people who report sexual assault are almost always telling the truth. At a mere 62%, women who agree with that statement is higher, but still paints a dismal picture of the importance in believing women. This finding speaks volumes about our damaging cultural beliefs about sexual assault. And when you add issues of race, class, immigration, status, disability, and language barriers, for example, operating together, they form discriminatory obstacles to recovery and justice, and the effects become multiplied. So I am looking forward to hearing, Kalimah, what you have to share with us this evening about what more we must in fact do to remove these barriers, and how service providers can work together to center Black, Indigenous, and other racialized women and gender diverse people so that they get the appropriate supports to address their specific needs. So I'll just wrap up by saying that the Canadian Women's Foundation recently launched a campaign called Tireless, by which champions the tireless work done by activists, allies, to advance gender equity. Kalimah is truly one of the tireless, and it's great to have you here with us this evening. Thank you. I'll now hand it back.
Thank you, Paulette. I'll invite SARC coordinator Jennifer Drummond to say a few words now.
Thanks, Marley-Han. I'm really happy to be here. I'm really happy that Kalimah is here, and we're really happy that we're able to collaborate on this really important event. My name's JD. I'm the manager of the Sexual Assault Resource Center at Concordia. We're still fairly new. We've been around, I guess, for about 7 years now. We're a small team, but we offer services to all of the Concordia community, so students, staff, faculty, anyone who's been impacted in some way by sexual violence. So that could be a survivor of sexual violence, or it could be a family member, a friend who's supporting someone, or even someone who's received a disclosure and needs some support around that. So our services include peer support, counseling, accompaniment. Pre-COVID, there was accompaniment to police, to hospital, through the court system if that was wanted or needed, and also to services on campus. We strive to do our work with a trauma-informed and survivor-centered approach, as well as with an intersectional lens. And so it's really important for me to be here, to learn from Kalimah, and to pass that on to my staff, and to make sure that we're looking at all the ways that that we do our work, and how we can improve the way we do our work and deliver services, and what those services are, and who is accessing them, and what are the barriers to our services, and how can we make sure that we're addressing those barriers. Education and awareness raising is another really big piece of our mandate and priority for the university. So education about sexual violence prevention and response. This is the second year that Concordia has developed and delivered a mandatory sexual violence prevention and awareness raising educational program. There's an online version with multiple modules, or there's an in-person version. So we're really excited about that, and that about 50,000 people now as of last year have completed that training. And again, this year, there's going to be another big round of people completing that training, increasing their knowledge moving forward, and contributing to that kind of campus community and culture that we are shifting towards, or want to be shifting towards, one that's inclusive, safe, respectful, and where there is no sexual violence of any kind. So I'll leave it there. I'm really happy that everyone is here. I'm thrilled that Kalimah is with us this evening. Kalimah, your work is so important. It's so inspiring. I know that I'll be learning a lot, and I'm really looking forward to it. So thanks a lot for being here.
I would also like to thank our translators, Miriam and Dominique, for providing simultaneous translation during this webinar, and our ASL interpreter, Christopher, for helping make this event more accessible. Before I present Kalimah, I would like to welcome a special guest tonight, founder and executive director of Women at the Center, Nneka McGregor. I'll invite her to say a few words about the importance of this event here in Canada.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so very much. Thank you, first of all, to Paulette and the Canadian Women's Foundation for sponsoring the event. Thank you to Concordia University. Thank you to you, Marlian. And I want to start actually by my own sort of humility and gratitude to be coming to you all on this beautiful autumn evening from my home that's situated on the territory of the Anishinaabe, Mississauga, and Haudenosaunee peoples. I want to talk a little bit, first of all, about how I met this evening's speaker, and want to actually start by giving a shout out to all the Red Lipstick Brigade, because I saw all the women with bright red lipstick, and my team know that I call my lipstick my war paint, because I put it on whenever we go out into the world to do battle, right, in order to bring about equity and fairness and justice for everybody. So shout out to all the women who showed up today in red lipstick. How I met this evening's speaker. So last year, there was an event put on by Dr. Linda Baker and her team at the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children at Western University. And Linda's Learning Network team had invited a bunch of us who were on their committees to bring to the conference what we were calling emerging leaders. So I brought one of my team members, Kara Jones, and we sat on the train with the executive director of Women's Multicultural Resource and Counseling Center in Durham region. Her name is Esther Nyolu, fantastic woman, and her emerging leader, Ruby Mwaluka. We get on the train, we drive from on the train to London, Ontario. We get to London, everybody's exhausted and starving, and we all agree we're just going to drop our bags, wash our hands, and go next door to the grill and bar to get something to eat. Dropped our bags, washed our hands, all met in the hallway. And as we were walking, there was this striking, I mean, we could only see her from the back, right? This striking woman, bald-headed, just striking. And anyone who knows me knows that I talk to everybody, especially striking women. So we went up to her and struck up a conversation. And the first thing I said was, I mean, I love your hair, or the lack of it, because for years I was bald. I shaved, none of this was there, shaved all my head off. And we got into a conversation as we walked down the hallway. And then we said to her, we're going to grab a bite and dinner. Do you want to join us? And she said, sure. So we all go next door to the bar and grill and struck up the most beautiful, empowering sisterhood conversation, right? 5 Black women sitting in this a little bit of a divey bar. I was the only vegan in the team, and they were all eating steak and whatever non-vegans eat. But the good thing is that our speaker wasn't afraid of a glass of wine or 3. So I just immediately fell in love, completely fell in love with this woman. So by the next morning, I felt like I'd made a connection and I found myself another sister. And then when she spoke as the main keynote, completely blew me away. Completely blew me away. And when you look at all the invite that I actually sent to my network promoting this event, I said, you have to log in, you have to listen to her, you will thank me. And I honestly believe that everybody owes me a thank you for introducing them. If you haven't heard of her, you're going to thank me. At that same event, Marian spoke, as did the fabulous Jade Peak. And by the end of the 2 days, we had this little consort of Black women who were there providing support, providing allyship, providing sisterhood to each other. And it, again, fed my soul. It energized me, it re-energized me, and it gave me so much hope that, again, I was not doing this work alone, because sometimes I walk into spaces and I'm the only Black woman in the space. So every time I meet other Black women, I gravitate. I want to talk a little bit about the similarities between the work that our speaker, and again, Kalimah, the work that Kalimah does, and how it resonates and is very similar to the work that we do at Women at the Center. Unapologetically survivor-centered, unapologetically centered on the lived experiences of those who have navigated the systems, who've experienced the trauma, experienced the violence, and have navigated it. The US versus the Canadian context, understanding that we're both coming from a place of sort of recognition of the impacts of racism on the lives of our communities. And when I talk about our communities, I'm talking about Black women, Indigenous women, and how racism, and especially anti-Black racism, is embedded in these systems that were created by and for white supremacy. And how those embedded anti-Black racist systems lead to sort of differential impacts, right? And these differential impacts means that bodies like mine, bodies like Kalimah's, Black women and girls, our identities, our bodies, our experiences are erased, it's silenced. There's this sort of inhumanity around the way the burden is put on Black and Indigenous women and girls. And so the work that Kalimah's done, the work that she does, and the work that we do comes from a place of understanding that these systems, right, are not in fact, they're not broken. They are in fact working the way it was created, the way they were intended. It's not a glitch that it fails Black and Indigenous women and girls. It's actually a flaw, a feature. It's a design feature, right? So when you have people like Kalimah Johnson, who creates models that is intended to disrupt, right, and shift shit is the way I put it. When you have people like Kalimah who's coming up with models that's intended to hold these systems accountable, and it holds the systems accountable by centering and surfacing the experiences and the voices of those who have been deliberately marginalized, I say, absolutely bring it. Absolutely bring it. And it's the same thing that Women at the Center does. And just very quickly, recently we completed a 3-year project that was funded by the federal government, Ministry of Women and Gender Equality Wage, and some money we got recently from Paulette and her organization, Canadian Women's Foundation, to develop a model of an alternative model of justice for survivors of gender-based sexual violence. And that work was itself modeled on the work of other Black women, right? Black women in the United States, Black women, trans women, disability activists, who had developed this community accountability and transformative justice model. And every time I talk about this, I always pay homage to those Black women and trans women on whose brilliance, right, and just scholarship, all of our work is based. And I am very mindful of, you know, the need not to appropriate, even though I myself am a Black woman, but always to shine the light and pay homage to where it came from. So women like, you know, scholars like Beth Ritchie of Insight. If you haven't heard of them, go find them, fantastic. So why I am so excited to be sharing this very small stage tonight with this very large powerhouse of a model, of an advocate, an activist, whose model is itself transformational and life-changing, is because I am in awe of the work that Kalimah Johnson has done. So I'm going to say to all of you, be prepared to be dazzled by her brilliance, as I am. I am only saddened that because of the pandemic, we are not meeting in person, because we would have finished this, and with Anurada de Gaulle, we would have gone out for drinks, right? But I have my glass here. I'm going to raise it. I'm going to say, Kalimah, I am so proud of you. I am so honored to know you. And I am so girl crushing on you since 2019, since we met. Over to you. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much.
As Neka stated, this event is of utmost pertinence here in Canada and here in Quebec, where Black and Indigenous and racialized survivors continue to be overrepresented as victims of sexual violence, yet are least likely to access social and medical services due to the inherent systemic barriers present in service provision. As someone who's worked within the Quebec anti-violence movement, I saw these dynamics play out every day. The power dynamics that inform mainstream service provision hinder rape crisis centers' capacity to serve Black women. Until the infrastructure of support acknowledges historical and ongoing inequities, Black and Indigenous women will continue to be overrepresented as victims of sexual violence and underrepresented as service users. This is why having resource and support services that are by and for are extremely important if we are to support all survivors of sexual violence. Organizers and activists have been and continue pushing for culturally safe services here in Montreal too. Today, Kalimah's words couldn't be more pertinent at a moment where organizers are working on a project to bring culturally secure services for sexual violence survivors in Montreal North, a bureau with a large Black and racialized population and without resources for survivors of sexual violence. Now let's talk about our main speaker. Presenting Kalimah briefly is quite challenging since she has contributed so much to the movement against sexual violence, but I'm gonna try. Kalimah Johnson is a past assistant professor of social work at Marygrove College and founder, executive director of SASHA Center in Detroit, Michigan. She is also a consultant to the National Basketball Association, the National Hockey League, and the National Football League on matters of relationship safety and management. She has been an advocate and counselor to survivors of sexual assault and intimate partner violence for more than 20 years, and is an expert on topics related to culturally specific programming for sexual assault survivors, healthy relationships, domestic sexual violence, emotional intelligence, mental health, and well-being. She is a consultant to the National Women of Color Network and works closely with the service organizations to address the needs of Black survivors of sexual assault. Johnson is now founder and executive director of the Sexual Assault Services for Holistic Healing and Awareness Center, or SASHA, a Detroit-based nonprofit offering culturally specific sexual assault support and community education and outreach. Founded in 2010, the SASHA Center is the only organization of its kind in the country. Without further delay, Kalimah Johnson.
Wow, thank you. Thank you all so much. Marlahan, I appreciate you for holding my hand since COVID and I couldn't come and see you in person. And Neka, thank you so much for sharing all the nuances of our meeting together and being present. I'm so glad to see your face. And of course, I wish this was in person. I happen to have also met Marlahan the same exact way. Like, you know, hey, stop, let me talk to you. And we've been close ever since. And I also like to thank JD and Paulette. Thank you all. Thank you to the ASL interpreters. And thank you to everyone who has actually decided to be here with us this evening. And it is my hope that I inspire you, that I jar you. It is my hope that I provide for you opportunities to really process and think about where you are in this place, in this time, and where you're going to be when we're done. Because it's my goal that when we're done, that we all are going to choose to do something different, and do something different for women of color, but specifically Black women and girls. I do not apologize for showing up in this space, and I will tell you right now, the things that I'm going to share, the way that I'm going to share them are sometimes professional, sometimes personal, and sometimes political, and it will be okay. So I'm going to be asking you all to engage in the chat, and also I'm going to be asking questions as we go throughout. We have a couple of polling things that I want to kind of get a sense of who's in the room. But before we do that, I also want to say that I'd like to dedicate this webinar and presentation to Breonna Taylor. May her soul rest in peace. And to all of our ancestors, I say, Ashe. Service. Black women, bullets, and a bar. Serving Black women who have been raped requires a special kind of skill. Serving in Black silence that is so loud, all you hear are the echoes of screams embedded deep into her soul. Her heart hails bullets at those who claim to love her. You can't be afraid to confront her. You may have to meet her on the left side with hand extended for holding and grounding her. By the way, her feet left the floor a long time ago. Black women who have been raped got all the nerve, enough to swerve. Left hooks, she left looks with side eyes that could kill. Her innocence never existed. She was reconstructed after slavery, reconstructed after the birth of films, movies, music, and books. Black women who have been raped were constructed after the death of hip hop, reconstructed into Sarah, Sapphire, Sephrine. Black women who have been raped are morphed and disguised in disgust and repackaged as entertainment. Serving Black girl magic that has us thinking she is resilient. No wings, full well, but she is mad, and madness cannot sustain her. Hashtags in the Me Too movement has left a bad taste in her mouth upon moments that still reveal that she is nigga, jigaboo. Black women can't be raped, can't be sick or tired, can't be loved or admired, can't light fires of healing. We too busy kneeling and taking knees and killing trans and butch women. We too busy placing blame, creating shameful recollections of Tawana and Robin, Anita and Crystal. Pistols and promises are never enough to protect her. And sometimes, y'all, sometimes I just want her to open her throat canal and tell on folks who touch and dare us not to tell, who rush and say victims lie all too well. The 81% of untested rape kits in Detroit got Black DNA in a box at the hands of mostly Black men, whose ancestry comes from patriarchy and lynched-inspired silence. Better take it to your grave. The goings on in this house stays in your mouth. That's why we must stand with our sometimes too strong, too Black women. It takes a little more praying, wishing, and convincing, invoking ancestors and burning sage, having exorcisms, dance, and rituals. It may not ever be enough to bring forth her broken, for healing and love stroking. Serving Black women who have been raped requires a special skill. So I just punch out and I clock out and I leave this space that is intended for healing, holding sad stories and traumatic memory. I drive a few blocks to my favorite neighborhood bar. I order my favorite bottle, ready to swallow my pride, sit with the notion of not being a savior because sluts and hoes can never be saved. The bartender feeds the jukebox by specific request from a group of Black women gathered in the left corner, and they want to hear the king of R&B and Meg Thee Stallion and Cardi B. Serving Black women who have been raped requires skill. The bartender, well, this distracts him, and I bellow, yo, my mans, can a sister get some service in this bitch, please? Silence. So I wrote that poem as a collection of poetry that I was writing as I was registered for a writing course at Wayne State University. And I was one of very few Black women in the room. And that semester, I had decided that I was going to write everything that I could think of related to Black women and rape, because I wanted the classroom, the professor, and I wanted and needed to hear it myself. And sometimes the poems aren't pretty. And sometimes you can't be a savior. But when you can, you do, right? And one of the things in terms of not being a savior I want to talk about this evening is I wanted to open up an opportunity for us and for me to share with you, just in lifetime and organically, what my day to day looked like as the founder and executive director of a nonprofit organization that has been funded sometimes very well and not funded at all. And I know that social media pictures and hashtags and all these pages that we have, sometimes people think we're operating with millions of dollars. Last year, our budget was $60,000. This year, our budget was $75,000. We have applied for grants and funding, and we unfortunately were unable to be funded for a plethora of reasons, but we're going to probably and perhaps unpack some of that tonight. And the good news is, finally, we applied for an Office on Violence Against Women's grant in February, and just was notified a few days ago that we were granted $288,000 to spread out through 3 years. But mind you, at the SASHA Center, we know that partnering with folks is our best way to stay alive. And so we partner with a very large sexual assault agency here in Detroit that's ran by a white woman who happens to be my friend and colleague, and sometimes my ally when she needs to be. And they are literally have a budget of millions. And so that's not just because they apply for more grants, it's by design. And we'll get into all of that, but I also want to make sure that I find out and get a sense of where you all are and how we got here to having a nonprofit organization in Detroit that specifically works with Black women and girls was not easy. One of the main reasons why I started the program is because I'm a survivor of sexual assault. I experienced sexual assault as a child by a family member. Then I also experienced sexual assault as a teenager. And then before 21, I was sexually assaulted by a so-called boyfriend. The most horrific one, I would say, was when I was a teenager by a stranger. And they all were bad. Don't get it wrong. They all were pretty rough. But one of the things that I decided when I was in college was I wanted to work with that population. And it was twofold. I wanted to work with the population because I believed I could help, but I also wanted to work with the population because I knew that the population would help me. And one of the things that I started out doing, which wasn't in my bio because it was so many years ago, was I actually worked at the Detroit Police Department in their rape counseling center, which is now called the Victim Assistance Program. And I was there for 8 years. And while I was there, I had to respond to emergency calls that would come into our emergency room. And I would carry this pager. And one of the things that was happening to me in real time was, and I had to ask my supervisor, what was this really about? And was I feeling and sensing what I thought I was? I wasn't even sure, but I became sure in it after a while. When there was a victim of rape that would come into our Detroit Receiving Hospital, a long time ago, when a rape happened in Detroit, all rape survivors and all rape experiencers went straight to the Detroit Police Department. Went to Detroit Receiving Hospital. And as a social worker working in that capacity, I was the one to answer those calls. It was a group of us that had to do it, but it was my shift, it was my turn. And whenever it was my turn, I would notice and this is no diss to people in terms of how they work or who they are, how, you know, their level, but the more power, decision-making power they had, or the less decision-making power they had, I was able to determine who I was getting ready to interface with that was the victim of the sexual assault. So if I got a call from the intake person, the janitor, the security guard, the assistant nurse or something like that, and they would say, you got one down here, get down here when you can, no hurry, take your time, it looks like they're gonna be here for a minute, it was always a Black woman, always a Black woman. If I got a call from the physician's assistant, if I got a call from the doctor, if I got a call from the lead nurse, and they say, we have done everything there is to do for her, hurry up and get down here and stop what you're doing. And matter of fact, go through the lobby and see the family first and hurry up. She was always, almost always a white woman. The only time that they would rush me and it was a Black woman is if she was politically or religiously connected to someone in the city of Detroit, i.e. a powerful man. And so I started asking my supervisor, what is this about? Am I seeing things? Am I seeing this correctly? And my supervisor was really good. She tried to work with me around these issues and just said, you know, it's systemic. It's just the way it is. And it would be things like nurses saying her fingernails were dirty instead of getting under those fingernails to get that skin, because it might have been skin, brown skin, instead of saying her nails are just dirty. Did you swab that? And I would have to advocate sometimes to make sure that Black women got birth control. And I would have to advocate sometimes for police officers to take pictures of intimate partner violence bruises on Black women, particularly dark Black women. Oh, she's too dark, that's not gonna show up, I'm not taking a picture. I'm like, no, you're going to figure out how to get the lighting because there is a bruise there and we need to get it. These are the kind of things I was dealing with on a regular basis. And one day I decided to just walk out. I was done. And thank God for the Michigan Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence, because what they did was say, hey, we don't want you to just leave the work. So they asked me to become a consultant for them and to train domestic and sexual violence agencies in southeastern Michigan who were led by white women. And they didn't know, and I didn't know that I was being thrown to the wolves, but I was, because there was so much anti-Blackness, so much racism, so much power and control dynamics, so much of, we are just listening to you because they said we had to, because they're the ones that's funding us, or they're the ones that's providing us with technical assistance, and they said you had to come. And I had to engage in conversations to prove myself. I had to engage in conversations to prove that the work is important. I even had to engage in conversations with, I don't know how much I can teach you about working with Black populations, but if you don't hire a Black therapist up in here, and if you don't engage the Black community, and if there's no Black women in leadership here advising anybody, this is just a conversation. Don't know what kind of action is going to happen after that. And that happened for a long time. And then one day I had my last conversation. It was April, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, probably back in 2008. And the conversation that I had with a person who was in our field was so hurtful that I went home and I sat on the edge of my bed and I said, you should start your own agency for Black women. And then I said, no, I'm not doing that, whatever. No, get out my brain. Why are you thinking that? You've set up a nice little life for yourself doing dreadlocks in the basement and writing poetry and reciting at the clubs. Just stick with that, right? Then I went to sleep. And in the middle of the night, somewhere around 4:30 a.m., something around there, I heard non-gender like wind whisper. I couldn't tell, I couldn't even go back and tell you, it just sounded like wind. And it said, start your own agency and name it SASHA. So I sat up and I went to the computer, did a Google search. There was a SASHA in Canada. And then there was a SASHA farm in Michigan. And I said, Who am I going to tell that I had this dream? And then I pulled up a Word document, blank, typed the words out, SASHA. I said, it could be an acronym. And as soon as I said that, Sexual Assault Services for Holistic Healing and Awareness, where we intentionally work in the African American community, do prevention and education with African American men, and incorporate and include African traditional ways of doing this work, where we allow Black women to tell their stories in their way that they tell them with no judgment, and allow them to tell us what they've been doing to heal, because Black women been healing for a long time. You all just haven't asked us how. So I called the coalition. I called the woman of color in program management at the coalition. And I said, this is what happened. And she said, well, you know, Kalimah, we can't have you dreaming things like that. We don't help you make it come true. I'll call you back. An hour later, she calls me back and says, our ally at the time and director of the coalition was Mary Keith, white woman, and an ally, to say the least of her. And the same thing for Sarah Prout-Rennie now. She's really good as well. But back to Mary. Mary said, we're going to give you Cheryl Rogers, who was their staff attorney, free, pro bono, for 1 year until you start this nonprofit. She's going to send you an email, and you just answer the questions and do as she asks you to do. Here's the other thing about Cheryl. I don't know if she shares this with people or not, but she's also a Reiki master, meaning that she understands alternative practices and ways of healing. And so she was extremely patient with the work. She was extremely patient with how long it took me to get back with her about certain things. And eventually we were able to get the nonprofit status in 2010. And the other thing I need you all to understand and know is that we do the work in a way that just hasn't ever been able to fit into the mold. But I do believe that things are getting better. Now, that's my story. I really want to kind of know who's in the room. So I have a couple of questions. This is a poll. I just kind of want to get an idea of where everyone is. Like, I want to know how you're feeling today on a scale from 1 to 5. 1 meaning not so good and 5 meaning not so great. And then the next question I have is, have you ever felt invisible as a result of your race or any other part of your identity? And then my next question is, are you comfortable with the phrase anti-Blackness? And then I am comfortable with the phrase Black Lives Matter. I want to know that. And are Black women's voices centered in your workspace? So those who can read and understand that and can answer it, they can go ahead and start polling now. I don't know how that actually works, but I definitely want to see the answers.
They are anonymous.
Okay. And in the meantime, I'd like to, in advance, thank Marlahan for being the person who's going to be forwarding my slides for me. Because I promise you all, when I get to screen sharing, I will hang up the whole entire event. But I'm getting used to it. I'm getting better, but I'm always wanting to make sure I have someone in place for that. So thank you. I hope that you all are honest and brutal and true and open about this whole idea. Joshua, thank you. Okay. How are you feeling on a scale from 1 to 5, meaning not so good, 1 meaning great? Okay, so we've got, wow, that's an interesting dynamic here. More folks are closer to feeling pretty great, and then those are just pretty good, and then you got some that are even less than that, and then 4% who are not doing well. I just want to say that thank you for putting that in there, and I want to remind everybody to please engage in some level of self-care. Understand and connect to folks if that's what you need to do. I'm talking to my 4%. And then also, I am so glad that even though you're not so good, that you're in here with us, because I'm thinking that shows some effort on your behalf to not be isolated. I'm sending out all my love to you and my heart to you. Thank you for sharing that. And for those of you who are doing well, that's awesome. have you ever felt invisible as a result of your race or any other part of your identity? Wow. You all see that? I don't know who's in the room, but if there's any part of your identity that's made you feel invisible, let me be the first one to say that you deserve to be seen, you deserve to be heard, you deserve to actually take up space. Please do that. And there are ways to take up space. You can use your voice to take up space. Sometimes I use my body to take up space. And I'll tell you what that looks like. As an African-American woman working for professional athletic leagues, I get to fly first class a lot. And there are times when I'm the only Black woman flying first class. I haven't flown since before COVID, but as I reflect back, and it's really interesting how sometimes when women are sitting on planes, they're expected to hold their arms in, close their legs, sit, really dainty-like, and not take up much space because they're sitting next to someone who's taking up all the space. Well, as an exercise all last year when I was traveling, I was taking up all the space, elbow straight on that whole arm thing, elbow here, legs spread way out. And I know people would think I was so weird, but it felt great. Give it a try, take up space. I think I misunderstood the term anti-Blackness. That's okay, we'll get a chance to talk about it. That was just in the chat. And that happens when you misunderstand it. Maybe we can go through more of that. It says, are you comfortable with the phrase anti-Blackness? Okay, so 81% of the folks that responded said they're comfortable with the word. That's good, keep using it because it means something. Are you comfortable with the phrase anti-Blackness? No. I think some people may have answered no, saying that they don't want to act like it doesn't exist. Maybe perhaps that's what they meant. But at any rate, what I want you all to understand is that I want you to get comfortable with it. I want you to get comfortable with it, even if it hurts your feelings. I want you to get comfortable with it, to recognize that it is happening. I want you to be comfortable with it because anti-Blackness is what fuels white supremacy. And anti-Blackness is not something that just racist people experience and live out. Each one of you have had some kind of racist experience growing up. And I definitely want to ask about that in a little bit here. But let me see if I can scroll down. So am I comfortable with the phrase Black Lives Matter? Okay. Some folks say they're not sure. Until Black Lives Matter, we're going to be having some problems. All lives matter, yes, but Black lives are on fire right now, y'all. And I shouldn't even really have to say that, but I understand why you're not sure. A lot of times you're not sure when you've grown up in a household where Blacks have been blamed for everything negative. You've only seen Blacks being associated with negative things. And I'm just saying to you that Black folks are human and we deserve to live and we have a right to live. And I have heard all the arguments about why folks are uncomfortable with the phrase. I want to encourage you to get comfortable with it. Even reach out to me later on so we can have that conversation. Because I just want to know again who's in the room. You all are doing great. Are Black women's voices centered in your workplace? Whew. Y'all see that? I want to sit there for a minute. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for saying that. And there's a whole lot of reasons why Black women voices are not centered in the workplace. And what I've learned and what I've been teaching is that until you center Black women, you are going to have an agency that is ill-prepared and inappropriate to service anyone. And I'll tell you an experience that I had, and I won't say what shelter it is or what state I was in, but I did some anti-racism, well, racist and anti-Blackness training with the domestic violence shelter. And this was most recently. And we were talking about centering Black women's voices in the workplace. That not only included the staff, but also their participants, the people who lived at the shelters, centering their voices. Because there's so many stereotypes that exist for Black women and girls that people literally believe that it becomes problematic when they are trying to service Black women. Black women are not allowed the kind of time that they need just to be able to do their hair, just to be able to do their children's hair in a shelter. Because some people think we could just slap a ponytail in and keep going. That's not how Black hair works. And one of the other things that I've had as an experience in terms of doing this training is that a lot of white women are super excited and super over involved in our hair. I don't know what that's about. It's a fixation. It has to stop. And so one of the things that I asked in the room of the people that work there, Black women particularly, how many times when you come to work do you have to discuss your hair to coworkers? And one girl started crying. She said, too much. I just want to come to work and work. I don't want to talk about my hair to people who don't understand it. And then the conversation came up that they at the shelter had Black hair care products locked up, and Black participants, women, would have to ask for them in order for them to unlock them and give them to them. But the products that were not traditionally made for culturally specific hair types was available on the shelves everywhere. You could just grab it and go. You didn't have to ask anyone. There was no demeaning experience. There was no, I need to come and beg for this. It just was locked up. And so when we had the conversation about that, the midnight shift worker, white woman, was enraged. She didn't understand why it was. So what she did was she went to work that night. She took all the Black hair care products out of the locked cabinets and put it in the community cabinet for everybody. And then the white participants said, we like their products better anyway, thank you. So she came back to the training the next day, totally frustrated. And she said, I don't know what to do. I said, lock all that shit up. Make everybody have to ask for it, unfortunately. And then they got into this conversation about how Black women's hair care products were more expensive and where they're located. When they ask for donations, they don't get those things. And I said, well, whatever happened to intentionality and being deliberate? Tell your donors that's what you need. Ask for it. Create a line item for it. Because if her hair is not done, she might not go look for a job. She might not want to show up to anything because she feels undone. And it's that serious for some of us. But the minute we start talking about these things, we're treated as if they're frivolous. So let me tell you what that might look like at a center like mine, the SASHA Center. We have conversations about hair type and skin tone all the time at our sexual assault agency. And then we were asked to show, thank you, Joshua, we were asked to show why is it important to talk about those things. I got to put in writing why that's important. And okay, that's fine. But if this is some voyeurism kinds of thing that you're doing and not trusting the fact that my 30 years of experience as a licensed clinical social worker and my experience as a Black woman and my experience as a survivor of sexual assault and my experience of owning a natural hair care salon is not good enough for me to say this is an important topic for Black women and girls because you're paying for it, then keep your money. We'll figure it out. And that's what we've been doing. So what my day looked like today, 6 p.m., we have our HIP series virtually. And there's no one to answer the calls and process and make sure they get the Zoom links but me. And I'm the director and the founder. That's what it looks like. And I'm here for it. But it shouldn't have to be that way. So I want to bring up the slides if at all possible. I really appreciate you all giving and answering those poll questions. And it's my hope that we can get through the slides, and I'm being very mindful of my time. The name of this presentation workshop webinar is Working with African American Survivors and Experiencers of Sexual Assault, the SASHA Model, Black Women's Triangulation of Rape. One of the reasons why I have experiencers in quotes and experiencers in italicized, if you will, is because at the SASHA Center, what we've learned from survivors is that some of them were not comfortable with the word victim. Some of them were not comfortable with the word survivor. Some of them were not comfortable with the word thriver. And if they were comfortable with it, it may have been a comfortability along a continuum. So one day they might feel like a victim, and the other day they might feel like a survivor, and then sometimes they felt like thrivers. And so instead of us, those of us who are trying to provide support services to people who've experienced sexual assault, Black women specifically, we decided to start using the term experiencer so that they could tell us on any given day or time how they see themselves. It frees us up so much from labeling them. Although we know the funding says, depending on where it's coming from, you know, they use victim, they use survivor, some use thriver in certain settings. And we also use those words too. We haven't thrown them away, but experiencer works better for us. So let's go on to the next slide. So I'm a poet, and I want you all to listen to this poem by Lucille Clifton. She wrote this piece, and it's one of the pieces I tend to always share in this space. I know I shared a piece earlier, but it does not compare to what she's captured in these very few words. And it says, "Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up. Here on the bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight, my other hand, come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed." Something has tried to kill me and has failed. That's what you're dealing with when you're interfacing with Black women and girls, because something has tried to, and not just kill them physically, but emotionally and spiritually and body-wise, and everything about their own agency has been tried, has been attempted and aimed for to silence and to make invisible, especially in our work around sexual abuse and assault. I want to sit that there. And hopefully the rest of these slides will resonate with you as well. I'm gonna have you go on to the next one. Please and thank you. From 1989, Angela Davis said this: "Black women were and continue to be sorely in need of an anti-rape movement." Someone please that's here in this session, unmute yourself and tell me what you think this phrase is about. Black women were and continue to be sorely in need of an anti-rape movement.
Carol Souffrant raised her hand, so if maybe Joshua can unmute her.
For me, the way I understand this phrase is that Black women are made invisible both by the anti-racist movement and the feminist movement. So that's how I understand it, and that's how I try to address this issue in my work also as a researcher and as a survivor myself. So that's how it resonates for me.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, the feminist movement was not ours, as you mentioned, absolutely. And movements that don't include us at the organizing table does not allow us to say what we need. And the feminist movement doesn't resonate with us because the feminist movement, when it comes to rape culture and sexual assault, was more about holding perpetrators accountable and arresting them, and from a community that is over-policed.
Exactly.
And so why would we want police to come and help us when they have only harmed us?
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of comes up in our sessions with, not kind of, it does come up in our sessions with our survivors. But the first thing that'll happen when someone's working with a Black woman who's been sexually assaulted and she says she doesn't want to call the police, then there's some victim blaming there, and there's some blaming about whether or not she really was raped or what's happening. And actually, if you watch and see, and I'll tell you something else, and this is kind of off the cuff, but I just need to give you all this visual. I was working with another domestic violence agency here in Detroit, up north though, where they're more populated, it's not that many Black folks up north. There's some, but not really enough, not a lot. And there was a Black woman in a shelter, and her therapist, her advocate, was a white woman who actually had a therapy dog that was her own. And she thought it was a good idea to bring, of course she needed to bring her dog to work, but that the dog would be good for others as well. And this Black woman read her up and down and was like, I'm not coming in there, that dog is nasty. I don't want to come in there, the dog this, the dog that. And no one ever asked her why she was so adamant about it. They just thought that she was being problematic. And they thought that she was being just offering pushback because that's what Black women do. But literally, I implore you right now, you Google Black folks and dogs and you tell me what you see. And I'm not trying to paint a broad brush here. Black folks do have animals. Black folks do have dogs. In my community and in my family, most of the dogs my family have are for protection. They're not for fluffy, friendly, let's do this. It's for watch out. And then in my community where I live, where women have to navigate the public bus system and there's stray dogs everywhere, they're not having good experiences with dogs. But you gotta ask. And you gotta ask if, in fact, they have this traumatic memory that they're not even aware of. I wanted to let you all know that until we start listening to the voices of Black women and girls, we're going to miss this opportunity to have an anti-rape movement just for us. And when you create a way to address us, you will create a way to address it for everybody. Because you can't leave anybody out, but that's what's been happening. Service provision reality check slide. Are services culturally specific for women of color at your agencies? That's a question I want you to think about. Of course not, but we'll talk more about that. Are Black and Indigenous women in leadership? Are services queer, trans friendly, and accessible? Are services safe? Or are you hanging some kind of resource over their head that if they do this, then they get that? What is anti-Blackness and how does it impact our work? Are services specifically assisting actively working sex workers? What have you done to be inclusive? Who are we not servicing and for what reasons? You have to ask yourself these questions based in reality and truth. One of the things that I want to bring up specifically is anti-Blackness, by the way, is experienced by everyone. Anybody ever heard of Black Irish? Anybody ever heard a family member say, you don't get too dark? Doesn't matter if you're Latino, if you're Indian, it doesn't matter. Darkness is perceived as less than. Darkness is perceived as not good. Darkness is perceived as evil. It's this binary that's based in all kinds of religious beliefs and everything. And you grow up with that, you hear that, you listen to that, and then you go to work. And then you go to work at an agency that's not even showing any leadership of Black people. And then you have to reconcile the lessons that you've learned in the past about Blackness and then show up in the world unbiased. And how do you do that when you haven't even recognized it to begin with? So I want you all to think about these things. And everything that I share with you about the SASHA Center and how we do our work, take it, borrow it, steal it, just give us credit, cite us. And the development of the model didn't come from the fact, I mean, it could have been my dissertation, but I did not get my PhD, and that's okay. Maybe later, maybe at Concordia. But I want y'all to understand that that model was poured into by community members, hair clients, survivors, advocates, directors, security guards. We had one guy that worked at a strip club come and give us impact and talk to us about this. Trans women, sex workers. We asked everybody to weigh in on that model with just the same amount of weight and legitimacy as folks who had education, who've been working in this field for years. No one was treated like, okay, you're not important in weighing in on what this model is. And so I have been approached by a few folks, like, what papers did you refer to? Listen, there was a toolkit put together by Aisha Shahida Simmons when she did her film No. And in that toolkit, everybody from Beth Ritchie to Robin Brown to Lori S. Robinson, Black women talking about rape and sexual assault was included. Moya Bailey, all of these scholars and women who have done this work, and also understanding that our experiences make us experts. That's what makes us an expert, our experiences. All right, I see that. And that we should be allowed to bring that to the table. We should be at the table. And I do remember, JD, is your staff in here at all?
Yes, a couple of them.
Good, good, thank you. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
And you know how important that is.
Very, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. All right, so these are the questions I want us to think about as we move on. So I want to teach you about SASHA Center's work and how we do it. I want to integrate again the personal, professional, and political. I want to explore this model. We may even have an exercise if we have time. But these are actual pictures from our work. That picture at the very top is a picture of survivors on a Culture Cures, History Heals tour of the Underground Railroad in Detroit. The Underground Railroad exhibition is inside of a church, in the basement of a church. And that particular day, we actually rented the whole space out so that it could just be those survivors there. And what we know is that we're not going to ignore our slavery history or past. We know that it's an opportunity to see ourselves as resilient. We know that DNA passes through the blood and that we got a little bit of that as well. And that we can tap into that resiliency and tap into the ways in which Black women healed and in which ways Black women continue to further our race and further the people here. And understanding that sacrifice and holding those accountable for what happened and how it happened. And so what we did was we went on this tour, we had a before and after discussion, and folks talked about their connection to their culture and their understanding of historically understanding the Underground Railroad and how it's going to serve them now as they integrate the traumatic experience of sexual assault in the here and now. We've been surviving again for a long time. We just have never asked Black women how they've done it, and we haven't created spaces for them to do it in ways that resonate with them. This is something that resonates. Look at those women and young girls together. You know, typically they say when you run support groups, because that's all we do is support groups for self-identified and experiencers of sexual assault. We don't do the crisis work. We don't do court accompaniment. We need that for women of color. And we are working on that with larger agencies who have that kind of capacity. But at our capacity, which is where we want to be, we want to engage and provide safe space and time for survivors to integrate these experiences. And one of the things I want to say about that is we should be able to be allowed the luxury to have time to be together. And typically, what I learned in social work school many years ago is you have all your 18-year-olds together or your young people, you have all your middle-aged people together, when you're running group. You have your older people together because they can understand each other better. That's not how we operate in the Black community. We believe that intergenerational healing is paramount, meaning that a 16-year-old can be in the room helping a 60-year-old and vice versa. And what people aren't doing, which we need folks to do in terms of how you operate at your agencies and in terms of how the funding is spent, is understanding that when a Black woman is in the room, that's what you should be counting, not how many times she comes to the room. The fact that she was there that one time is enough. See, white folks want to see this lineal thing. We have a relationship with the Detroit Institute of Arts, which is a white institution here in Detroit. They had the nerve to ask me, why is it that when we run our sessions at the Detroit Institute of Arts, that the Black women that come are never the same? Because what we're always looking at is this lineal way. They came on day 1 and day 8, they're supposed to be this much better. When actually day 1, they got better and they didn't really have to report back to us, because that's ego at that point, in my personal opinion. When we started at the Detroit Institute of Arts doing these groups with Black women, they had 0 Black women docents at the DIA. And this is a volunteer position. And there's a lot of reasons and a lot of ways I can think about, Black women not volunteering for whatever reasons. But we had a little situation. Now, my little friend Judy, Jewish woman who ran our groups, helped us run our groups when she would take us to show us the women in Black art and African art when we would do our projects. There was a artifact on the wall, and one of the girls said, "That looks like George Clinton." And Judy said with her precious self, "Well, I guess you could call him George." I was like, no, this is a cultural moment. Let's talk about who George Clinton really is. And she didn't like it, but I was just like, no, we have to stop. Let's talk about George Clinton for a minute. This is an opportunity for her to learn. And then that turned into a training. I said, everybody from this art department, we have to get together. And I have to tell you exactly what SASHA Center is and how we operate and why it's important. And within 3 months, they got 6 Black women docents trained that work with us specifically. So that's how you show up and don't apologize. That's how you show up and allow and try to push for space. And I'm thankful that the DIA did that, but they're still struggling. They got staff there that are just not happy because of anti-Blackness and racism and who's supposed to own what space and be where. But I digress. Back to this picture. The one in the white with the white head wrap on, that is one of our lead facilitators, Kendra Ventura. She's been with the organization since its inception. And all these other folks are either survivors or volunteers. Our guiding principles at the SASHA Center, of course, is dignity and respect, culture cures, history heals, group healing, and being African-centered. We can get a little bit more into what African-centered means. It could mean many things to many people from many places, but a lot of the activities and things I pull from West Africa, more specifically Ghana, which is where I actually am DNA connected. I have been to Ghana several times, and I have an adopted son in Ghana, West Africa. He's in Accra, and he's in Accra now, but he was born in Kumasi. I'm also a queen mother. It's in Pepiasi, which is a little further up north from Kumasi. So I engage in these African traditional principles and ways of thinking and being. I was raised by a very African-centered mother who taught us the principles of Kwanzaa, taught us African words. I was given an African name in 1968. That was the year I was born. I did not change my name. There was a lot going on in Detroit in 1968, matter of fact. Because I have 2 sisters, one younger, one older. Their names are Teresa and Valerie, good Catholic names, but not me. So with this African name and with the African principles my mother instilled in me, I decided to bring that into the healing work that we do at the SASHA Center. Here's the model. What you may have heard me say earlier today: experiencers, sexual assault, Black, African American, women, alternative, survivors, victims, ancestors, and non-traditional Now, non-traditional is a word I don't really like because it really is our traditional practices. It's non-traditional because it's not fitting in the white standard. So that's what I mean when I talk about that. But I want you to pull up now because I know that is a very hard graphic to look at. It's really small, but we have a quick view of what that model is in short. So this is a quick view of that larger graphic that you just saw, and it's called the Black Women's Triangulation of Rape. And I'm gonna be very clear, we came up with this model because we wanted funders, the general public, and service providers to understand the barriers that exist that keep us from having a funded program, that keeps communities silent about sexual assault against Black women and girls, and that makes service providers ill-prepared to deal with Black women and girls. And one of the things that we talked about, and that's why I said the top policies and funding can be a barrier for us for sure, oppression and slavery, and all the institutions that go with oppression and slavery that's the foundation of why and how these things happen. And through the dehumanizing, over-sexualizing Black women, stereotyping Black women, the objectification and cultural appropriation, you want to be us, but you don't want to feel us. Denying resources with systemic barriers, like because if she takes too long to do her child's hair in the morning, she's going to miss an opportunity to get some kind of benefit while she's at the shelter. Or if she has a man living with her, she can't get her state funding. Or all of these unnecessary, controlling, hateful kinds of ways of dealing with Black women and girls. Denial and invalidation of our experiences alone. Hypersexualization of Black culture, music, and media. Silence and invisibility, denial of humanity to the LGBTQI community. We also added the actual notion of ableism and all of that gets in the way. So the untested rape kits, what kind of message did that send to Black folks here in Detroit, where 81% of those kids were Black women? Police brutality, the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. Just to give you an idea, sometimes engaging Black men about Black women who have been raped until we unpack the trauma of the historical memory of lynching, we're not getting nowhere. And until we talk about the struggles of having the imagery of Emmett Till, who was murdered and drugged and maimed just because they thought he looked at a white woman, how do you expect to engage a Black man about rape with that historical understanding? But we do, and we try. And so our unique identities are the exact same things that people use against us when it's time to surface us. And there's a whole lot more I could say about the Black Women's Triangulation of Rape. I want you to take a look at this and tell me what stands out to you, those of you who want to raise your hand and get in here and get your voice in here. But there's also a pretty much a comprehensive paper that we've written about the Black Women's Triangulation of Rape. But it keeps Black women from reporting. It keeps Black women in silence. And a lot of people don't even understand when COVID started and we were asked to be put on house arrest basically, or you have to quarantine, or you have to be in your house. Sometimes, and a few times, Black women have been triggered into their past sexual trauma because the last time they sentenced themselves, if you will, to their own homes was as a result of being sexually assaulted. And then don't let them be at home with abusing people or people who are hurtful, but just being isolated in and of itself. And then the pressure that Black women have of coming together. And then the fact that we've had all this death and having to come together or having to figure out how to honor the dead. Honoring the dead in the Black community is extremely important. Honoring our ancestors is extremely important. And if you aren't doing that, if you're not engaging in that, as you're talking about healing with Black women who've been sexually assaulted, you are missing a huge piece of work of where it is. But one of the other things I wanted to say about this model is that it helps Black women see all the ways in which they've been silenced. all of the ways in which they've been misrepresented, all of the ways in which, you know, they have been serviced inadequately.
We do have a couple of raised hands. Were you wanting to answer questions here?
Yeah, sure.
I've allowed Moringa Ottawa D to speak.
Okay. Oh, well, I've been released. Okay. I just wanted to say that this has been profound. I can't even get over the depth of how you're going into, you know, all these theories. I wasn't prepared, trust me, but everything is I'm relating to so much. And unfortunately, as you're talking about the silencing of Black women, we're here trying to raise our hand and talk and interject, and I can't get unmuted. It's just, when we're aware of these things, you know, it can make such a big difference. So I just wanted to say, what you're talking about, really, I'm really gravitating to, it's resonating with me. So thank you.
You are so welcome, and thank you. And I think that's an interesting dynamic as well, that we set things up in ways we don't even think about how they silence us.
I've got Florence Caron Baloukoun.
Hi.
Hi, yes, thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation. Yeah, like it was said earlier, it made me realize how I've been silenced by other people. Especially when you talked about our hair, like we don't realize how this can come into play in our experience and how we can be so silenced. So thank you so much. I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So you were talking about healing and connecting to your ancestors.
Yes.
Do you have more like an example or something you do to, you guys do at your center to really do this practice?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we do is we ask for survivors to tell stories about an ancestor that they may have known that was blood or non-blood related that was good to them. And sometimes we ask them to imagine and to journal about what that ancestor would say to them about healing from sexual abuse and assault. We also teach our survivors who are comfortable with learning how to build their own ancestors' tables and bovidas, meaning that we have pictures of their ancestors, we have a ritual using libations, and we do libation ceremonies, and we use water and sage and other things of the earth for them to actually represent their ancestors. And we provide them the opportunity to discuss and bring their ancestors up as though they are legitimate, and that their opinions and their impact on their lives is extremely important. Did I answer? Did I answer?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. We are intentionally and on purpose creating spaces for Black women, and it has not been easy. It has been challenging. As you heard Paulette say earlier, all the things that you all have experienced there, we've experienced here in developing this program. But what we have decided is that we're going to do it anyway. What we have decided is that we're going to be creative in the way that we do it. I really like the idea of the programs that she was talking about as well, and how important that is. Our groups are geared towards African American women, but women who are not Black can attend. But we tend to explain to them why it's important not to take that space up, and then they opt to go to the multi-million-dollar sexual assault agency down the street. We do not necessarily sell that they can't come, but we say if you are operating out of a space where you can't hear us talk about police brutality, or you can't hear us talk about slavery, or we have to stop and Google because you don't know what chitlins is, this ain't your group. You need to go where you can go, where we can have this conversation and have it freely. And there are some people who are not Black women who have fared very well in our sessions, but they fared well because they were very aware of their space. And it's also triggering, and can be triggering, and we talk about triggers and what they mean, and we work with our survivors through that, and our facilitators are very well trained around respect and dignity and worth, and making sure everybody feels valued and that everybody has a voice. But there are times where just lighter skinned Black women or darker skinned Black women in the room can be a trigger. And we talk about what those triggers mean, and also provide an opportunity to talk about and push through towards healing in that manner. One of the things that we ask during our support groups is we say, what's the good news? And sometimes people don't have good news, and that's fine. But we ask what the good news is because we're asking you to be intentional about your healing. We're holding you accountable and responsible for processing and change. And we will support you through it, but we definitely gonna keep asking. Now, a lot of times in typical work, it's like, oh no, let Black women be angry. That's what they are anyway. You ain't giving them a chance to show their full selves. You're so busy assuming that they're angry that you don't see the range and realm of which how they show up in the world. And we're saying there's a range, and we're getting people comfortable in their range. Yes, sometimes we have a right to be angry and mad, and we need to create and allow that space to happen. A lot of my white colleagues, friends, and allies, stop acting like you scared of Black women. Have a conversation. Be open to being checked. Be open to saying, hey, I hear that, I'm gonna correct that. Where do we start from here? Create an opportunity to listen and hear them. And we also make sure that we provide other kinds of auxiliary services. We connect them to all kinds of resources. We are not the kind of agency that is going to, we're agnostic. Whatever it is you do, whoever it is you need to talk to, however it is that you need to engage in your spirituality, we allow space for that. As long as you're not hurting yourself or hurting anybody else. But we have to ask, and we don't ask. Sometimes Black women, when they're telling stories, not all the time, but sometimes Black women, when they're telling stories of horror, they use humor. And a lot of times that can be misdiagnosed by someone who's not informed culturally, don't have the language, don't understand it. We had an officer interviewing a client once, and he asked if she knew her assailant. She said, I entertained the thought, or I entertained him. He said, where you dance at? That's not what she meant. That's not what she meant. So I want y'all to understand, go on to the next slide, because I want to get to some of these other pieces that I know is real for you all. Keep going. That's about no snitching and Dr. Joy DeGrew's work, post-traumatic slave syndrome. Take a look at that. Go on. So non-traditional activities, dance, music, and movement, prayer, meditation, and reflection, urban legends, and storytelling. We had a survivor once tell us that she blamed herself for her sexual assault, which we've heard that before. There's nothing new about that. But she blamed herself because she chose to walk down one alley and not another alley. And she said she avoided the other alley because everybody knows the pig lady lives down there. Well, that's an urban legend. You can Google that. Google urban legends in urban cities, Detroit, and you will hear this whole entire story that even my mom told me when I was a kid about the pig lady. Pig lady hated kids, she ate kids, all this other craziness. But she took vacations in the summer and she never worked on weekends or looked for kids on weekends. And she really found kids extra tasty between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. Where we're supposed to be, school. It's a story. But if she's not allowed to be present in her cultural nuance of this story without us assuming that she has a mental health issue, then how can she heal? If we don't make space or room and don't take out the time to study these things. So it's humor, irony, and satire. Read Dr. Henry Louis Gates' work. That work informs the way that we activate and involve ourselves with survivors at the SASHA Center. These are, that actually is a Mickalene Thomas piece in the middle. It is Biggest Life at the Detroit Institute of Arts. That is a staple piece that we take our survivors to when we're at the Institute of Arts, because the woman is just so fly, so beautiful, so dope. She everything, and it's just really amazing to see survivors when they actually see that picture of her. Yes, thank you. Yep, that is called Something You Can Feel, and it's by Mickalene Thomas. She's an African-American artist. If you saw Toni Morrison's documentary, her hands were the hands that you saw creating the art of the picture of Toni Morrison before they actually got into the documentary. This woman work is amazing. And now that this is in closer, the woman with the glasses and the SASHA Center shirt on with me is Larminda Davis. She is one of our lead facilitators. She's running group. Her and Kendra, the ones you see to your right, is actually running group right now as we speak virtually. We just started our groups virtually, and everybody else are either participants or survivors that we actually do this group with at the Detroit Institute of Arts. And the way that we do it, a lot of people say, how can you say that going to the museum is cathartic or healing for survivors? Well, it is, because we made it that way. We have them come in. We start with a grounding question, such as, what do you have to look forward to as you get on your journey to heal from sexual assault? Who have you been hiding from, or what have you been hiding as a result of your sexual assault? And then we go look at African masks, and then we go and make masks and talk about the good and the bad of masks. Like, are you wearing a mask to protect yourself? Are you wearing a mask to do this or that? So this is success. One of our survivors that we've worked with, who created a whole entire conversation with authorities in the city of Detroit and asked them question by question, how is it that they failed at the rape kit backlog? And she was a victim and survivor of the backlog. And we actually helped her go through that. I moderated, but she was, her name is Elle Travis, and she actually was the guest panelist for this event. And that's what we believe are also cathartic, these events where you allow them to have their own voice and to lead. And while I moderated, I really didn't. It was really her moderating, because she was telling me what to say and texting me and giving me all the questions that she wanted me to ask, and making sure that I gave her a chance. And so Rebecca Campbell, Dr. Campbell, researcher and professor at Michigan State University, was one of the panelists that took her questions. Mark Farrar, who was the lead investigator for the sexual assault kits in Detroit. So we just get involved, and this was for Sexual Assault Awareness Month last year. This is our work with the men.
There's one question in the Q&A. I can read it out. I'm feeling 1 out of 5. I feel invisible as a Muslim migrant queer woman, and my community is dying from suicide. I'm comfortable with anti-Blackness and Black Lives Matter. Black women are not centered in my field of work with LGBT refugees.
Wow, thank you for speaking that truth. Thank you. And then it says at the very top, it says, why is it important to advocate for sex workers in NGOs? I'm running out of words to explain that to folks. I'm so glad that anonymous question came through, because that was what I was going to try to get to at this point. I think people need to stop being so judgmental. I think people need to understand that sex work is not, it happens. It's real. It's what we've done. And so sex workers need to be safe, and sex workers need to also have what they need to be safe. Now, let me explain to you how important we think that is at the SASHA Center. This Culture Cures History Heals tour. This was a tour that we took survivors of sexual assault to New Orleans. And at New Orleans, we partnered with an organization called Women with a Vision. Women with a Vision is an organization. They have a house over in Treme, and their whole entire agency was built to advocate on behalf of sex workers, be with sex workers, have a safe space for sex workers to drop in. And my survivors, our survivors from SASHA Center, spent the whole day there talking about why it's important to protect sex workers. And then the other thing I was going to say too is I want to give voice to what's happening there in Canada with this whole notion about sex workers. And here's the other thing too. While we were in New Orleans at Women with a Vision, our survivors, our facilitators and volunteers made kits for sex workers that included condoms, boric acid for yeast infections, and it was the oil in there called Popo Bigon. We made all of that for them. And that's because they deserve, they're human just like everybody else. Who out here treating them like they're not human? That's what I want to know. I want to make sure that we have in this room the opportunity to talk about this. This was our survivors, because at the end of the day, who are we as human beings to deny other human beings a right to safety, security, support, love, acceptance? So this was in New Orleans. While we were in New Orleans, we also went to the Whitney Plantation, which is a plantation that takes visitors but tells the story from the perspective of the slave. It's only one like it in the country. We also had a chance to do an ancestor reverence exercise where we had a second line band and a parade for the survivors. to Congo Square, which is Louis Armstrong Park, where we did an actual libation ceremony honoring our ancestors. This is our work we did last year with the men. DeAndre Levy, if you haven't seen it yet, on Red Table with Jada Pinkett last week, was one of our facilitators and funders of this program. The National Football League gave us money to work with men in community. Omari Barksdale is still one of our facilitators. And their whole goal is to talk about healthy masculinity and how to show up in the world where Black women and girls are safe, and how to also center Black women and girls in all of the work that they do. So even when we're in community with these men as they're training, they always give Black women and girls the first voice and the last voice in every training and every workshop we do. We also have done a bike tour, all that kind of stuff. And I just want to make sure we have enough time for questions. So this is some resources. These are women of color that were organizing in the city of Detroit around gaining and creating visibility for Black women and girls. Of course, that's the information on the slide. Folks can have that. Let's see if there are any final questions that I can answer. Thank you so much for everything. Thank you. I really appreciate the interpreter, NECA, Paulette, JD, Concordia University, Marlahan, thank you so much. I know I wish we had more time, but I'll come back. Any questions?
We do have a couple of anonymous questions in the Q&A.
Okay.
The first is the answer to divest out of these non-inclusive NGOs who's not willing to listen / change? Question from a Black woman.
Yeah, divest. Why invest in something that's not investing in you?
And another anonymous question. This question is for JD. This is not a criticism, but an honest ask to understand how has the SARC been able to address some of the questions Camilla put forward earlier, such as inclusive. Sorry?
Oh, Kalimah, not Camilla.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Kalimah. Such as inclusive and culturally specific services that address the QT BIPOC needs around sexual assault, when the reality is that your staff appears to be all white.
Thanks, Joshua, for reading the question, and thanks for to the person asking the question. It's a good question. Yeah, and it's something that we are talking about at SARC, and it's something that in our service delivery and our creation of services, our creation of education and delivery of education, whether online or in workshops, that we have been consulting with different parts of the community about making sure that we're consulting with a diverse groups in the community, whether it's trans people in the community, queer people, people of color, women, men. We're trying to get a really diverse feedback on what we're doing. But yeah, staffing is definitely something that continues and still exists as an area where, you know, we could use more staff, and we could use more diverse staff for sure.
You know, I'd like to also say that with this workshop, it is certainly my hope that each and every one of us in here work to solve these issues. We have to support and help one another. We have to admit when we're wrong and we do better. And I'm also saying that maybe there's an opportunity for the women of color that are in this space to organize so that you all can talk and continue to plan and create. Because sometimes you have to just do like I did and just start it, you know, and it's not, like I said, it was not easy. It's like, even when I started it, I still find myself in spaces where I'm outnumbered. And then find your allies. But I think that these are very legitimate questions. And I've sensed also that there's a lot of hurt feelings in this space, and justifiably so. And what I'm saying is use that pain and change it into power for change, and try your best to operate and develop a voice. And don't keep asking for permission to have a voice. Just do it. It's easy for me to say on this side, but trust me, I pay for it because I'm the one answering the calls, filing the paperwork, submitting the accounting every month to my accountant, because I want to continue to be in control of this. And I don't want nobody telling me what to do. And I'll give money back before I do something that does not fit with Black folk. It's unfortunate that we have to keep taking that hit. Yes, sorry.
There is another question in the Q&A from Arij Elmi. Again, I'm apologizing for any mispronunciations. For all panelists, are there spaces/resources that focus on Black women and sexual violence resistance available focused on Canada?
I can speak to that. So the work that I talked about earlier on, our Transformative Accountability and Justice Initiative, we had conducted a series of one-on-one interviews with sexual violence survivors who'd been raped and reported. And then we conducted focus groups with survivors who'd been raped and didn't report to the criminal legal system. And throughout those focus groups and one-on-ones, we didn't see any Black women show up in that until the focus groups. Mm-hmm. We also conducted a court watch. We monitored criminal assault, mm-hmm. Sexual assault court watches. None of the complainants were Black. We audited decisions from judges on CANLI, which is a Canadian Legal Information Institute. None of the decisions pertained to complainants who were Black. So that again showed us that Black women were not showing up and engaging with the criminal legal system. So the initiative and the framework that we developed, this Transformative Accountability and Justice, does center the experiences of Black, trans, women living with disabilities, because we know that the current system wasn't built for us. Mm-hmm. We just launched the report in March and are in the beginnings of conversations with government on providing funding so that we can actually create a physical center that will then, provide the healing and accountability. And what makes this initiative very different from the criminal legal system that currently exists is that it actually will provide compassion and support, not just for the survivor, but for the aggressor. Because I think, Kalimah, you said it earlier on, that you can't really stop sexual violence until you intervene with men who use sexual violence as a way for power and control. So our model is looking to figure out ways to engage men who've used sexual violence and to help them transform and change their behavior. But it is centered on the experiences of Black and Indigenous and trans women, because as you said, these are the voices that nobody ever listens to. So we are bringing them at the heart of this stuff. So go to our website and you can read more about the initiative. Thank you.
And the next question was related to how can we help sex workers around mental health. I would love for us to be able to have sex workers in leadership positions and leadership capacity, and how sex workers need to be at the table to tell us what they need. We can't assume we know. Just as Women with a Vision, when we were there, every week they had a session for trans women. And the session went like this: food, something to nourish and drink, not alcoholic and all that, but in a room. Just come. Y'all know what y'all need, and let us know how we can help you and get the fuck out the way.
I just wanted to also take a moment and add, since NECA intervened, just so you know, on November 26th, the Simone de Beauvoir Institute, me and Professor Natalie Bratteville are organizing an event on anti-carceral perspectives to end gender-based violence. And NECA is one of our guest speakers. So for those who are asking, where can we hear more about this? Just stay tuned. We have more events to come.
Trust and believe the expertise of people who have experience. I'm sorry, I just had to say that.
Well, I think it's a nice way to close. Thank you so much, Kalimah. It has been an honor, not just being with you this evening, but just knowing you, meeting you. You have really impacted my life in a very special way. And I thank all the sponsors once again, all the attendees. Thank you for listening in, for connecting and sharing. There's a lot of generosity in the room tonight, and I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all of your support in the front and in the back, around all the sides and on the top of my head. You know, I love you and I appreciate you.
I love you too. So on this note, I hope everybody stays safe, takes care, and we'll see each other soon.
Be safe.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, Kalimah.